Welcome, everyone, to another presentation of the World Music Institute's WMI at Home. And I'm going to be talking to Seamus Egan. My name is Steve Winick, and as Brian said, I've been an editor and a folklorist for many years, and I've known Seamus for many of those years, for a shockingly long time, actually. Seamus Egan is known to fans of Celtic music throughout the world as a member of the band Sólas. Of course, he's the thing that he's best known for, but I've known him since he was a kid playing on the Irish music scene on the East Coast, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And now he's got other exciting projects going as well. But he's an All-Ireland champion on 4 different instruments and plays even more instruments than that. So we'll also be seeing some of those great instruments put to good use here tonight. So Seamus, welcome, and thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, well, thank you. It's an honor to be part of this, and it's great to see you again. It's been a while.
It has been. I'll tell you something. Our mutual friend Mary Armstrong wanted me to tell you that she thinks you look just like your dad looked when you guys returned from Ireland. I guess you were about 12 years old at that time or something.
It was around, yeah, it would have been. It's so funny you say that, because I saw a picture of myself today, and it was taken sometime over the summer, and I had to do a double take. I'm starting to think that I look like my father.
Right. But she meant it in a good way. She thought he was extremely handsome back then, and she thinks the same.
See, well, my father is 84, I think now, 83, 84. But I think when I saw myself on this photo, I thought I looked like I had,
all right.
had aged up to 83, 84, all like just in a matter of months.
Not quite. But we're getting there with our gray beards and stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, this year didn't help.
So, I mentioned that you started out, really touring even as a child almost. I mean, a teenager. I remember seeing you in New York when I still lived there. You came up with Siobhan and Rory Ann at some point.
Right, the Eagle Tavern.
Yeah, the Eagle Tavern and those things. So talk about that experience. What was it like? That scene was amazing around that time, that there were just kids who were becoming, well-known national Irish music figures. What was it like to be participating in that scene back then?
Well, it was one of those things, you sort of look back in the retrospect, you're like, well, that was kind of, it was the beginning of something, I think, of a sort of a new, I don't know, like a sort of a new era in sort of in Irish music in America. I mean, at the time, we were kids, and kind of, we just felt like we were part of something that had a long lineage before us. So, we were just sort of doing what we saw, our sort of elders do. Like we were just sort of now in that sort of that path. And getting to play. I mean, I remember being so excited, getting to play the Eagle Tavern, which was sort of, that it was a shrine of for Irish music at that time in New York. And it was like, oh my God, like everyone played at the Eagle Tavern, and to get a chance to play there, as kids. And my father would drive us up from Philadelphia, and we would go play there. And so it was amazing to be part of that. And there was a whole, that the New York, all the Irish music that was going on in New York at the time. You had, people like Joni Madden coming up, and Eileen Ivers, and you had, the Mulvihill School of Music, which was like churning out all these great young players. And we were a little outside of that we were, because we were in Philadelphia. But, there was enough, we spent enough time going up and down the turnpike to connect with it. And in Philadelphia then, the Irish community, the Irish musical community in Philadelphia was super strong and had a long history, but was at that time was really being shepherded, I think, by Mick Maloney.
Sure.
And so my good fortune when my family moved back to Philadelphia was to meet up with Mick, and he sort of took me under his wing, and that was sort of when when we moved back to Philadelphia, I had no notion of continuing to play. Playing music was just something that I was doing as a kid, and playing in the feshes and the flas and stuff like that, and there wasn't any sort of notion that it would all these years later would be still talking about it and being
Right.
involved. So but I think entirely my meeting with Mick and him kind of taking me under his wing, I think really opened up that possibility to me, and I got to travel and meet all my musical heroes, and it was that what you're talking about there in New York. That was the beginning of a real sort of magical time.
All right. Well, how about, I know we like to start out with a tune. How about you give us a tune that you would have played back in those days, a traditional Irish tune from your misspent youth?
Well, yeah. Well, actually, it's a tune that I played back then, and it's a tune that I still play because particularly because I just love how it sits on the whistle. Back then, I was probably playing it on a tin whistle, but now I sort of like the sound of the low whistles a bit better. Yeah, it's a tune that anyone that's ever played Irish music or listened to it would be familiar with. It's called the Longford Collector, but it's a lovely tune.
Thank you so much, Seamus. That was a great version of that tune. And you just mentioned Mick Maloney, and I'll just say that, full disclosure, Mick moved to Philadelphia in order to go to graduate school at the University of Pennsylvania and get a PhD in folklore.
Yep.
And I did the same thing. That's why I moved to Philadelphia, to study with the same person that Mick had gone there to study with, whose name was Kenny Goldstein.
Right,
and so I fell in with Mick quite soon after I moved to Philadelphia as well. And I had been influenced to go there by Mick to some extent because I'd been getting involved in Irish music. So I really do understand and agree with his foundational nature on that scene. And the fact that, you met with him, you're saying that was one of your first things that brought you into it professionally. So talk a little bit about, I guess, the experiences you had with Mick in the Green Fields of America and in the group you were in with Eugene as well.
Well, yeah, with Mick, I mean, that really, that started, I guess I would have been in high school, starting high school, and I would go over to Mick's house on the weekends. He lived in Germantown,
Yeah.
and I would go over there, and at the start, my dad would drop me off at Mick's house, and well, no, actually, he would stay, and then Mick we would just hang out and talk, and Mick would play, record. He had this incredible collection of 78s and old, just a phenomenal collection of 78s. And every other album ever made of, any note played of Irish music, of any word sung of Irish songs, it was in that house. But eventually that sort of, an afternoon spent there, turned into like staying overnight, and then days on end. And I was practically living there at some point, and it was an amazing place for so many musicians would, if they were traveling through Philadelphia, they stayed at Mick's house, or they would at least stop in. So I got to meet all these people I'd only heard on the radio, or I'd had their albums or whatever, and suddenly, I'm sitting at the kitchen table, playing with Liz Carroll, or Frankie Gavin is there, or you wouldn't know who is there, and suddenly, for a kid that was just obsessed with Irish music, suddenly, it's like all of your musical heroes are sort of manifest in front of you, just just out magically. So it was a really formative period of time, and then Mick would eventually, I would be there at the house while Mick would be getting ready to go off on tour, and with Greenfields, so folks to be gathered around, and this was well before I joined, it's just the excitement of watching all of that sort of rehearsal, and, so it was a world of music that I had never seen. And with Eugene, Mick played a lot with Eugene around Philadelphia, and sort of that tri-state area. And my relationship with Eugene actually goes back to like way
Right.
back, because it was Eugene who introduced my parents to one another. So I
Yeah,
would
just to clarify, we're talking about Eugene O'Donnell, who was a great fiddle player and also step dancer on that Philadelphia scene, but originally from Ireland, and he moved back to Derry before he passed away. So continue, sorry.
no, yeah, Eugene was an absolute one of a kind, and so yeah, besides playing the fiddle, he was a bit of a matchmaker as well, apparently. And so he introduced my mom and dad to one another at the Irish Centre in Philadelphia, which was a place that carried a lot of history for the Irish community there. So then, and when we lived in Ireland, Eugene would send my mom music. Like he would write out music tunes that he wrote, or tune, like once he found out that we were learning music, and so just reams of sheet music would arrive from America, from Eugene, of tunes that he thought that we ought to know. So yeah, so when got a chance to play with Mick and Eugene, they would bring me along, and eventually sit in a local concert, and eventually we started touring around the country, and so that was it was a great experience for a teenager.
All right. Well, what if you played another tune, and this time, maybe a slow air in
Oh,
Eugene's honor, since that
very,
was his forte.
a very, very clever segue there. You've done this before. Well, look, I'll play an air, but it's going to be it's nothing like Eugene would play an air. Eugene was an absolute master of slow air playing. And for those of you who may not be familiar with Eugene's playing, definitely you should check it out. It's a very different sort of take on Irish music. And he was, I think, singular in that approach, and and there was no one like him, and there won't be anyone like him again, and not only as a person, but also in how he played. It was really just remarkable. So even though we're going to use Eugene as a segue here, I'm not trying to sound like Eugene at all. So I'll play an air that I'd known for a long time and forgotten about for probably even a longer amount of time, until pretty recently. But it's an air that when I kind of rediscovered it again, realized how much I loved playing it and how beautiful a tune it is. And I learned this particular version of this air. It's called An Fionn. And the version that I learned was from a recording of a great flute player by the name of Paddy Taylor, who I believe was in London.
Mhm.
I don't know if where in Ireland he was from. I want to say Galway, but I don't. For some reason, I don't think that's right. But in any event, he had one album that I know of. And I don't know if there was any other album. It was called Boy in the Gap, which is a beautiful flute album. And this was a tune that was on there that I learnt years ago, but like I sort of just recently rediscovered. It's called An Fionn.
Lovely. So luckily, we all have little computers on us all the time, even when we're using this computer. So I used my phone to check. Paddy Taylor was from West Limerick.
West
And
Limerick.
yeah,
Okay.
so saying that just so that you don't get in trouble with Mick, we've got
I
a,
know,
we got a Limerick power. So
So we really connect. That segue was really great. Now,
right,
I wish I'd known about the Limerick connection, and then
right, right.
wow, that's top professionalism. Like,
Excellent. So, but a beautiful tune and beautifully played. So thank you so much, Seamus. That also segues into a question that we have in the QA from a viewer, since the flute is involved in the question. And the question is, the person says that they've always been mystified by the technique of circular breathing and wonders whether you use circular breathing in your playing.
no, I'm equally mystified by circular breathing. I tried it once and I nearly choked. And
Yeah.
I didn't have the courage to go down that path. I mean, yeah, it's an amazing thing. I think, but one of the things in Irish music, I think that is sort of perhaps undervalued, or maybe doesn't get the sort of the shine that it, like when you're playing the flute, is sort of the sort of the razzle dazzle of ornaments and all that kind of stuff and speed and whatnot. But breathing in Irish flute playing, and the use of breath as a sort of rhythmic element, and a way of sort of giving definition to it, to a tune, and that sort of way of how you take a breath, where you take the breath, Is it a big breath? Is it a small breath? It becomes a real sort of subtle sort of way of coloring how a tune might be. So to eliminate that, I think might be a strange sort of thing. I mean, in I don't know. And I could also, that could be a theory based on the fact that I can't circular breathe. If
Yeah.
I circular breathe, I might be just shouting from the rooftops about the, how great circular breathing is in Irish music. Um, but yeah, like, if you listen to like all the different styles of flute playing, going all the way, Matt Malloy or Seamus Tansey or Paddy Taylor. There's all these different ways of that they breathe, and Josie McDermott, and it's like you can. It's a stylistic element in so much of Irish flute playing.
Yeah, I think it's even true on the whistle. If you listen to Joni Madden versus Michael Russell, right? The use of breath and tonguing also is completely different for those two players and for most players. Yeah.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
it's a real. It's a hard thing to. It's a hard thing to describe or to explain to someone, but yeah, the sort of the clarity and the definition that the breathing, the tonguing, and all that kind of stuff brings to whistle playing and flute playing, and it's a whole subject matter unto
Yeah.
itself.
Yeah. Well, we're getting a little nerdy here, I'm afraid.
Well,
So,
that was always going to happen. At least,
right. Exactly. So, another thing that comes up that was a big part of your life when you were younger, it was the competitive Irish music scene, right? The All Ireland Championships.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about participating in that whole side of the music.
Yeah, again, it's one of those sort of it's its own sort of world, and it's as a kid growing up there, and you know, fortunately, it wasn't something that you were given too much opportunity to think about. It was just sort of like, okay, you're learning. Here's a good, you go to these feshes and flas, and you're entered into them and you compete. And they're my memory of them was that they're absolutely terrifying. And you would just sit in a room, usually some cold, schoolhouse, and there'd be anywhere from 1 to 3 people sitting at a table behind you or in front of you, and you would just play a couple of tunes that you'd been practicing and practicing and practicing and practicing, and then invariably mess up while as soon as you sat down in that chair, because you had all these people behind you and the judges in front of you. And then yeah, it was a terrifying experience, but I think it was also the process of doing it, I think, was not just for myself but for all of us kind of going through that. I think it was a real I think it sort of, the standard of playing sort of started to kind of maybe climb a little bit, because, and this is not really any comment on musicality or anything. It's really about the sort of technical aspect of playing, because that's kind of what was on display. I always felt that it wasn't necessarily the best musicians that always ended up in the top spots, but it was like anything, like I think in that sort of competitive world, there's sort of boxes that get ticked, and if you happen to tick some of the boxes that are sort of are wanted, then you can. So I was grateful for the opportunity and for the experience that it provided, but it was never something that I thought too much about. I honestly, I was super grateful when I didn't do it anymore, because it was so nerve-wracking.
Yeah. No, that's definitely what I hear from a lot of musicians, is it's great while you're doing it, but it feels so good when it stops, right? That's sort of the best thing about it. So
Really, yeah, my even talking about it, I can feel that
yeah.
very particular feeling right there, where like that it was because you would go on the weekends, you know, and so we would get into and a lot of them, the fishes and things would have been on a Sunday, and the sort of I've this sort of enduring memory of, you know, leaving home on a very early on a Sunday morning, and my parents would load us all into, like, I'm one of six, and they'd load us all into the car, and like, now this is super early, we would catch the first mass on the Sunday morning before having to go away. And so, and the first mass, there'd be hardly anyone there, and it was still like, for the most part, pitch black out. And it was just this, I don't know, I just sort of had this memory of it just being this sense of impending doom that was just like, and everything about it was cold, it was dank. And then we were off, and this feeling in my stomach, and then we were off into the car, and then in front of people to play. And it just, yeah, Sunday mornings were not, were not, I didn't look forward to them at all.
And yet we're very happy that you stuck with it. Well, you won 4 senior championships, which is a great thing, and then continued playing even after that. And so one of the questions that comes up for me, so I moved to Philadelphia at about the time that you left Philadelphia. I think we might have overlapped very briefly, but in any case, I think you went, did you go to Boston first and then to New York?
I had a very, very brief
yeah.
Academic career in Boston.
Right. So during that time, one thing that might be interesting to the audience too is that while in your last days in Philadelphia and that first time when you were growing up there, you actually had a job at International House in Philadelphia, and when you left, I got your job. so I worked for Helen Henry for a couple of years there, and I was still there in the job when you came back to play at International House as a member of the Chanting House.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
And I always felt that lineup of the Chanting House, which if I recall was you and Eileen Ivers and John Doyle, and of course Susan McKeown, whose band it was.
Yeah.
And I think there was an African percussionist who was with that group. Yeah. But I always felt that kind of, that Sólas felt like something that had come out of that constellation to some extent. Is that accurate, or is that, am I just projecting?
No, I mean, I think, you know, certainly, you know, the sort of, I think the bloodline certainly is there between, you know, with John and myself out of the Chanting House, and then, you know, kind of moving into you know, what evolved into Sólas. And certainly the Chanting House is really, I think, the early 90s, like the very early 90s in New York. Because I think I moved to New York in, I want to say like maybe 91 or late 1990, 91, something like that.
Right, I think that's about right, because I moved to Philadelphia in late 90, which is just, same, yeah.
So it was around that time. And then, and right then in New York at that time, it was really the sort of, there was this, you know, something was happening in the music scene there, and like with regard to Irish music. And we would play every Monday night at a place called Paddy Riley's on, what was it, 30th and 3rd or 29th and 3rd Avenue?
Yeah, right around there, yeah.
And it was, you know, it sort of grew into this sort of amazing thing on a Monday night, and it was like you wouldn't know who would show up, but that was the Chanting House sort of, it was kind of their set, you know, they had, and we'd play I think 4 sets a night, something like that, and that was really remarkable. And so the Chanting House, we did a little touring, not a whole lot, and then eventually, John and myself would do the occasional thing outside of the Chanting House, maybe as a duo. And then, I don't know, we just sort of got into talking about, you know, trying to do something a bit more, I don't know, solid, you know, and had the opportunity to put something together for a festival. I think it was the Lowell Folk Festival in Massachusetts. And that was really without any plan of it becoming Sólas, but that was the sort of, I think, the first time that that original lineup of Sólas without Karen Casey. Karen wasn't, we didn't meet Karen until later, But it was John Winford Horn and John Williams from Chicago
Right.
and myself, and we went up there and we played, and that was the first sort of, it wasn't called Sólas,
Right.
but it was that was the beginning of it. But yeah, so I think it was the line from the Chanting House to Sólas is is
Yeah.
is is
All
a
right.
it's
So
it's not
that,
all in your
that's
head. You're
excellent.
not just making it up. It happened.
Yeah. So that same era was a big one for you as a solo artist as well, in the sense that you worked on several projects, including the Brothers McMullen soundtrack, which I recall made a big impact at the time. And out of that, to some extent, you ended up with a co-songwriting credit with Sarah McLachlan.
Yeah.
So talk about that that little moment in your career, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you sort of look back and with, with experience and sort of knowledge of how things can work, that, you look back on that, and I look back on that, and like, that was just a remarkable series of just incredible, fortunate events that just sort of landed in, one after the other. And yeah, the Brothers McMullen came about, and I guess 94, 95.
Around
It was,
there, yeah.
yeah, it kind of, as independent films are want, it started, it would stop, it would start, it would stop. And so I can't really remember when it sort of actually got going. But yeah, that, I mean, that all came about because I was on tour, and it was actually it was a banjo tour, and it was with Dirk Powell and Tony Furtado and myself. And Dirk had a car, and we were touring. It was like in February or something like that, and we had this car that broke down, and we ended up staying at a house with someone that their son had started working on this film and didn't know anything about it. He said, it's something to do with Ireland or something to do with Irish. Do you have any music? So I was like, okay, here's some, and that was it. And then like ages later, I get a call from Ed Burns, who was, wrote the film and directed it and was the star of it. And that's really how that started, with from Dirk's car breaking down. And then, one thing led to another, and eventually co-writing I Remember You with Sarah McLachlan, um, which was remarkable. And then, the success that she had with the song, um, like looking back at that on it now, I think at the time I was like, yeah, that's what happens. I it's so not what happened. What
Right.
at all. It's ridiculous. So yeah, it was an incredible. But I think also there was that moment in sort of the culture here, that there was like all of this sort of, suddenly you had this sort of Celtic Tiger happening. You had
Right.
all things sort of Celtic. Yeah, there was this weird thing in the air, I think, and you had like, there was a kind of a fascination
Right.
over here with all things Celtic. I mean, there was either a tin whistle or pipes on everything. Like it was just like, it was like the sound. I mean, so I think I was, and Sólas and the chanting, all, like, I think all of us at that time, we were sort of caught up in that wave of there was like just an extra bright spotlight on the small part of our world, that just sort of made it
Right.
shine a little brighter for a little while, and then it got back to normal.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned the magic word there in talking about the genesis of your involvement in the Brothers McMullen project, which was banjo. We haven't heard you play the banjo yet, and I wonder if you'd give us a banjo tune.
You are the king of segues.
I know, right?
I'm going to start really being really careful about what I say. So, I'm not going to mention a tuba or anything, because I don't have one here. Um, okay, so banjo. Let's think. I'll do, since we're sort of like going down a little bit of memory lane with tunes, and again, another old tune that I love on the banjo. The Lark in the Morning. It's an old piping tune, but it sits really lovely on the banjo.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's a great tune for the banjo. You're right. What a great sound. So
Yeah, it's
thank you.
a lot of those piping tunes, for some reason, sit really nicely on the
Yeah.
banjo.
All right. And I mean, you studied banjo with Mick among other people, right? So yeah.
But
So
yeah, I mean, I think Mick was definitely the most sort of influential. I think it was at a time when I mean, I was playing the banjo before coming, before we came here, and but yeah, Mick really, as far as like just really sitting me down and
right.
showing me what I was doing wrong, which was pretty much everything. So yeah, it was a huge influence.
All right. So, we're getting, we want to move on and talk about Sólas because we haven't talked about that project yet, and that was like 20 years of your career.
Yeah.
The the first time that I actually interviewed you, Seamus, if you recall, was at Sigma Sound while you were recording the first Sólas album.
Yeah.
And it sprang to mind because of this snowstorm that we just had, because it occurred during the blizzard of '96, which in about 3 weeks, that'll be 25 years ago, believe it or not. And Johnny Cunningham was there as the producer of the album, and you guys were ripping away on these great tunes and songs. So talk about not just the formation, but Sólas as a vehicle for your artistic expression over all those years.
Well, I mean that Solace. I mean, and that window of time was just sort of that was all happening right around the time of the Brothers McMullen and the Sarah McLachlan song and all these other things that were sort of floating around at the time, and so it was like a really exciting time, and like Solace and that album and like the formation of it really wasn't really a plan, much past that album. There was no plan. I mean, we knew we were going to make the album. We knew that we'd met Karen Casey, And we said, you know, we were enjoying playing together, and we thought, well, we'd make an album, and that was it. We just, you know, there was no talk about anything really. And you know, I'd known Johnny for, you know, for a long time, and so it seemed like it made sense to ask Johnny to produce it. And you know, because he seemed to have, he did not seem to, he had this sort of, you know, he had one foot firmly planted sort of in the sort of traditional, but also he had sort of a way of looking outside of that, and seeing how things could move
Yeah.
in a different direction. So so Johnny seemed to be, you know, to make sense for us to work with. And yeah, so in Philadelphia, we gathered that winter, that January, and we had the snowstorm. And you know, I just have so I mean, I hadn't thought of it, it was 25 years ago, but that snowstorm and the sort of, and where we were as sort of making this new thing was just really, it was kind of magical again, because the whole city shut down, and it was like we had the whole place to ourselves for several days. And where we were staying was just down the road from the studio, so we could walk back and forth to the hotel. And one of my, you know, lasting memories of that period working on that was the first night after the night of the snowstorm, and the next morning getting a call from Johnny and saying, you know, that you had to come down to his room and to see this. And I was like, oh my God, I don't know if I want to see this. I don't know what's going on. So I go down to his room, and he had fallen asleep the night before with his window open. Why his window was open, and I don't know. But anyway, it was. And the snow had drifted into his room, and had gathered at the foot of his bed. And so he'd wakened up with this snowbank at the bottom of his bed in a hotel room. And it was one of those just amazing sort of visuals that it's hard to actually believe what it was that you were seeing. But it was sort of made sense that it would be, that Johnny was involved
Right.
in that particular kind of, you know, strangeness. But yeah, I mean, that album went, you know, it was, you know, it was well received, and there seemed to be an excitement about what it was that we were doing. And we had an opportunity then to, you know, from that album, I think there was a couple of things that ended up happening that sort of, I think, pushed us down the road maybe a little faster than otherwise might have happened. Was that we played on, we got asked to play on Mountain Stage on the radio, and we also got asked to play on Prairie Home Companion at the time. And so I think those two things, and really sort of gave us a platform that, you know, we certainly, I think, made a difference. We got in front of a lot of people very quickly with that. And then suddenly we were, you know, touring all over the place. And really the next thing, it's like 20 years later. And it's, honestly, it was a real sort of, yeah, once it started, it didn't really stop. And until, you know, we decided that it was, you know, we were all kind of feeling that it was maybe time to at least take a break, which is what we're on now. But I mean, we made it to 20 years, and we toured.
Yeah.
That the last album was sort of the 20th anniversary album, where we gathered everyone that had been in the band, you know, over the 20 years. But going into that, we knew that we were going to, you know, we were going to definitely hit pause for I don't know how long, you know.
Yeah.
It's, you know, remains to be seen. But it was definitely time to you know, to take a break and try other things for all of us, you know.
All right. Well, in line with that, why don't you tell us about the Seamus Egan project, the what you've been doing since that pause on Sólas?
Well, you know, it sort of coincided with a few things, and you know, ended up moving out of Philadelphia. So you know, moved up here to Vermont. So I'm sort of living a much more sort of feral existence up here. So that's kind of exciting. And but yeah, kind of got settled here, and then over the years with Sólas, I'd threatened to make another album, just sort of like one of my albums, whatever. And but never, there was never any time between
Yeah.
the touring and making Sólas albums or the production work that I was doing. It always got pushed, off the table. And then suddenly I was like, oh, okay, I've got some time on my hands and I don't have an excuse not to do it anymore. So, and like I said, I'd always been writing. So I had a bit of a stockpile of stuff, but I also, like I said, was writing new stuff. And so I started to look back on some of the older stuff that was sort of laying about that hadn't gone anywhere, we didn't do anything with, and seeing what of that stuff might have connected to some of the newer stuff. And then had the good fortune of meeting up with some new folks to play with, and so made the album with a great guitar player from New York, Brooklyn, Kyle Sana, and met Owen Marshall, great bouzouki player, harmonium player, who lives in Portland, Maine. And so it was sort of, I liked the idea of what really I liked about it was the sort of trio, and that it was sort of guitar, bouzouki, and that sound of guitar and bouzouki, which that's the sort of sound that I think I grew up with,
Hmm.
and so to sort of have that sort of there in the lineup was always sort of was exciting for me. And so yeah, we sort of it took a while. I mean, it was a slow start, but it sort of purposefully so, because I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do, or really what what was there, because you come out of a band, you have a very sort of certain type of an existence in that, and a certain way of going about things, and certainly your identity is all, after 20 years, your identity, you don't realize it at the time, but your identity has become this
Right.
this thing that that you were a part of. So it takes a while to sort of get your head around that distinction, and sort of extricate yourself slightly from there, and sort of think about what it is you want to do, how you want to do it. And so that that's not something that happens overnight or a couple of nights. Takes a little bit to settle into a new existence. So but I was fortunate to have the time to do it,
Hmm.
and had a few false starts, but eventually kind of settled in, and got my head down, and made the album that became Early Bright, and that came out earlier this year, which it seems like it was like it didn't. It feels like it came out like 100 years ago after being.
Well, this year has felt that way for a lot of us, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And so we never actually got to tour it, but we were in the middle of the tour for that album, when when everything
Yeah.
stopped. So yeah, so it's sort of my experience with the album, and playing it has been sort of in large part, like sort of in this context. So I have a strange relationship to the album, in the sense that it's not really been played out. It's been played out,
Yeah.
but it's not like you would, your what your experience tells you would be doing.
Right.
So but again, I think this particular the environment that we're in right now, and the circumstances, sort of you sort of have to look at it and go, okay,
Yeah.
trying to work within it, because there's no
Yeah.
point not trying. So my experience with this album, this music, it is what it is, and it's
Yeah.
kind
Well,
of
it's a lovely album, and I know it's available on your website, so people can go and check that out, and find the Seamus Egan project, Early Bright, your latest recording. And I guess the next thing that we should talk about is the concert that you recorded for the World Music Institute, because it's a different lineup again, and some really great people. So tell us what that's going to be like.
Well, yeah. I mean, the idea behind the project, like the reason that you used the word project was that I kind of wanted, after the band experience, wanted to sort of have something that was kind of uh, maybe a bit looser, right, in terms of its structure. And so the idea of a project was that that people could kind of come and go, um, and and that it could, have could evolve, and what, you know so for the show that we filmed um, for tomorrow night, is it's myself and Owen Marshall.
Mhm.
He's there. He will be there, and the wonderful Jan Falquet on guitar. And you'll know Jan from Gentacorum,
Yeah.
great French Canadian band. It's been had a yeah, I've had a few opportunities now in the last couple of years to get to know Jan a bit better, and to play some music with him. And it's been an honor to get to work with him. He's really wonderful.
Yeah, he's a fantastic musician and a great person too.
Yeah,
It's always great to see him and hear him play. So is there something from that concert that you could preview for us, even
sure.
though you don't have the other guys with you?
I know. So this is sort of like this is so I could do something. I'll do something on the whistle again if I have that here. Oh yeah, okay, this one. So you have to sort of imagine. Well, you can imagine it for now and then experience it
Exactly.
in its fullest tomorrow. But it's a tune that I wrote from Early Bright. So it's part of the set, and it's called Tournesol. See. So
Lovely tune. And so, obviously different from pure traditional music, and yet it's got that, whatever it is that the great tunes have. So really well done.
thank
Um, so we're running low on time, and we do have one more question, which is flute related. So I guess it's a good moment to bring that in. It's from one of our viewers, Peter Fallon, who asks, do you think there's ever been a better trad flute player than Matt Malloy? And if so, who that would be?
Oh, well, you know, um, well, I mean, for me, Matt's playing was the reason that got me excited, not just about flute playing, but about Irish music. And so
Well,
so
when you lived in Ireland, it was in Mayo, right? It was near Matt's home, in fact.
yeah, was yeah. So, but I never met Matt, you know, when I was a kid there.
Okay.
And quite honestly, I mean, he was such a sort of a superhero to me as a
Sure.
kid. I wouldn't have known what to do. You know, like we got to see. I remember one time, the Bothy band were playing in Castlebar, which was just down the road from where we lived in Foxford, and you know, to me that was like I don't know, that was like going to see you know, I don't, like Michael Jackson or something. There was not like it was the Bothy band, and I got to see them in
Yeah.
person. I got to hear Matt Malloy
Yeah.
play. It was just like just multiple brain explosions. But it was really so Matt's playing, as far as I'm concerned, is the sort of the pinnacle of flute playing in a certain way. I mean, there are so many great Irish flute players, um, and you know, Matt was my entry point and my sort of and is still, you know, what I sort of aspire to. You know, he's just he sort of there's like Matt and then sort of the rest of us are kind of
Yeah.
over here. Um, but you know, as far as great flute players, I mean, like Seamus Tansey, phenomenal and hugely influential for me. Um, Josie McDermott again. I mean, all very different styles,
Right.
and my love of their playing is for different. You know, would I could point to some. Okay, this is why I love their playing, so I think it's hard to say like just a sort of like a you know, a sort of for me to say, you know, yeah. I mean, obviously, so Matt is like over here. So what? There's like he's his own category, and I don't know. It depends what style of playing you really kind of I suppose
Sure.
gravitate to, but Matt definitely was is the sort of the light.
Yeah, great. Well, we do have one more question from a viewer, which I think would be a good way to wrap up, actually, because it's about the Celtic music scene more generally in the world. And the question is, where would you say, from your perspective, is the most dynamic Celtic music scene today? And who are the who are the principals there?
Wow, I don't know. Sort of. I mean, I think sort of. I think there seems to be a lot of. I mean, there's like the younger generation of musicians coming up now. The standard is just it's frightening. So I mean, so across the board you have that. I mean, I think there's some really incredible stuff coming out of Scotland. You know, and some really inventive. You know, young players and young groups you know, a lot of sort of I don't know how you would describe it, and I'll do it poorly, but sort of like a cross pollination between sort of traditional stuff and sort of maybe new music, classical. I mean, there's sort of this really interesting you know coming together of it, and yeah, I think you know the Celtic Connections Festival in Glasgow is it's a really inspiring sort of snapshot over a 3 week period in you know in January of all of this sort of I don't know, it's just like there's a lot going on there. I think it's a really interesting and has been for a few years now. And whenever I get the chance to be there at the festival, I always kind of come away feeling quite inspired by the whole thing and seeing what folks are doing and hearing it. And yeah, I'd say,
Yeah.
I don't know, for me right now, I kind of like what's going on there.
All right. Well, and I'll also say, the interesting thing about the question is that it involves the question of where you draw the boundaries around Celtic music, right? Because you mentioned Jan as a player in your latest concert, and certainly French Canada is one of those places. Quebec is one of those places where this music is really strong. But whether you consider that to be a branch of Celtic music or a separate, its own thing, is up for grabs, in the sense that the form is so certainly related, but people may not want to be put into the same box there. But that would be another answer to like a really strong place where this tradition is.
Yeah, or I mean Galicia.
Galicia, yeah,
is
sure.
incredible. Brittany. I mean, it's just like there's so many great sort of pockets, and I think it's it's sort of it's hard to it's great that there's that there isn't an easy answer for it. It's just sort of like what my experience currently. That's what
Right.
So I had the chance to go there.
But we can say that the best place for Celtic music this weekend is going to be the World Music Institute online, because you're going to find this concert with Sheamus premiering tomorrow. So everyone should come back for that.
Another professional segue. It's epic.
Yeah, and I think we're gonna have to wrap it up, as reluctant as we are to let Sheamus go. But it's just been great to chat with you and catch up after all these years, and hear some great tunes as well.
Well, great to see you and have a chat, Steve. And really, it's been really enjoyed, and thanks to the World Music Institute for putting this, making this possible. So thank you so much. And
absolutely, thanks,
and Brian, and really appreciate it.
And I wonder, do we have time for one more tune? Gabby's nodding. So if you could play us out with a tune, that would be fantastic.
Let's see what do we have here. Let's try. Here's one that it's a tune that I wrote called "Vital Mental Medicine."
Nice.
In honor of Ernest Shackleton, who was a big fan of the banjo. So I thought he should have a tune.
It's also good for us in the pandemic to get some vital.
But, it's true. There's some on the way, so that's good. Well, I don't know. Is this sort of like a fade out, or is it?
Well, they'll let you finish, I think.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I'll keep it short. I wrote the tune. It was sort of in 4/4 when I wrote it, and I'd been sort of messing around with it as a jig. So I'll play it as a jig. I don't
go either way, huh?
Either way, it vital mental medicine that might need some medicine if it doesn't work.
Thanks so much, Seamus Egan. Thank you to the World Music Institute, and please do tune in again this weekend for Seamus's concert.
Exactly. And from everybody who was in the audience, everybody had a wonderful time. Thank you so much for joining us. The two of you, Steve and Seamus, this was such a fascinating conversation, and I know it's always too short, and I'm so glad we went a little bit over, and you just ended it beautifully now for all of us, and we look forward to tomorrow's concert. Thank you so much, and thank you all for joining. Have a good rest of the evening.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thank you so much. Bye now. Bye.